Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. Haven't done a video in a few days because I've been off on holiday, but I've come back with some quite big personal news. I have done a book on Spurs and their season last year of winning the Europa League, their mad season, which obviously plumbed the depths in the Premier League, down to 17th, but ended triumphantly for Ange Postecoglou by winning the Europa League and obviously ending with him being sacked as well. But I've basically done a chronicle of the whole season. I was obviously close to it throughout at pretty much every press conference, home and away, every game, home and away, not far off, and felt in quite a sort of unique, or if not unique, then quite a special and privileged position to write a book about that particular story, where Spurs finally won a trophy after 17 years. Doesn't happen too often. Yes, there's a lot of optimism and excitement about Thomas Frank, but who's to say, even if he has a very good season, the likelihood of him actually winning a trophy, it just doesn't happen very often. So it felt like something that I wanted to write about. And not only that, not just winning a trophy, but just it's very rare in a Premier League season or for a Premier League club. Not many that I can think of who would have had such a wild ride and such a difference in performance in the league and in Europe, full of fascinating bits and pieces, hopefully lots of fresh insight, and I've done it in a way that hopefully has a lot of sort of immediacy to it. If you do order the book, you do read it, I kind of go through the Ange's first season in a sort of prologue in kind of the past tense, and then after that it's sort of month by month done in the present tense to give it hopefully some immediacy, as if you're sort of reliving it all, which ideally is a good thing from a Spurs perspective. Might be some pretty brutal moments along the way, probably things that you've forgotten about along the way, decisions that were made, signings that they tried to get, signings that they obviously did pull off, all the different matches along the way, throughout a difficult season, which, as I say, ended in that triumphant way in Bilbao. So if you'd like to read it, it's now out to pre-order. I believe it's coming out on September the 29th. I've done it with Pitch Publishing, who are a publishers who specialise in sports books. You can get it at Pitch's website, which I'll put in the link below, and also on Amazon. If you just Google on that, or go onto Amazon and type in "Miracle in Bilbao," the inside story of the Europa League Triumph, but Miracle in Bilbao and my name, I'm sure it will come up, and it'll be there to pre-order there. So really exciting news. I'll be doing more about it, maybe a bit more depth in the coming weeks. Probably be on a few other Spurs podcasts. Obviously, the Tottenham Way. I think we'll do a pod on that pretty soon. Hopefully with Marcus, Tom, and George, or at least a few of them during international break. But yeah, for Spurs fans, hopefully a must read. I'm obviously not going to say that myself, but fingers crossed those who read it. And I've had a few people read it, including my good friend Ali Gold, who most of you Spurs fans will obviously know about, being the main man for Tottenham reporting. He's read quite a lot of it and seems to be a fan, so hopefully that's quite a good recommendation. Luckily, I've got a nice recommendation from the esteemed Henry Winter as well, who has read it, and there's a quote on the front of the book. One of the words he uses is forensic. It's very detailed, I would say, about the season. And also for Australia fans out there, Jared Waitley, who is someone who in Australia is a household name, maybe not so well known over in England because he's a sort of renowned Australian broadcaster, but he's someone that I've got to know throughout Ange's time. And if any of you guys, I know a lot of the guys and girls who follow me on my YouTube channel are from Australia. Some may have left because of Ange leaving, understandably so. But if you're still following, I know Jared's read it as well and given me a very nice sort of quote that's on the book about his thoughts about it. So hopefully that's quite a nice recommendation too. Like I say, it's available to pre-order already. I believe that pre-order orders are quite important to a book success. So any of you guys who want to buy it would go a long way, and your feedback over it would be lovely. Like I say, be doing more on this in the coming weeks. Just on the Tottenham Way, actually, I imagine a lot of you guys listened to that already. You may have first heard of me through our Tottenham Way podcast, which has been going for quite a few years. This season, we are now on YouTube as of the last few weeks. So it's early days, but we're trying to put out every podcast now as a video. So if you just search at the Tottenham Way pod rather on YouTube, you'll find us. Please subscribe and please comment on the videos. I know in particular, as I know from this own YouTube channel, that the interaction we get, which obviously we welcome anyway and find really engaging, to have a community of Spurs fans, as I do on my own channel. But it's key to a YouTube channel success as well. So really encourage any of that. And you can also find us on Instagram at the Tottenham Way Pod. And we've been on X for a while, which Marcus now runs himself, Marcus Buckland, which if you're a fan of the pod and know it well, will know he's not short an opinion or two, particularly sort of more fans' perspective on Spurs, which I think nicely balances out our somewhat slightly more sober approach from the journalists who are on there. So he now runs that account, so probably worth following as well if you're on X. Anyway, so yeah, Miracle in Bilbao, rather, if I can get the title of my own book right, out pretty soon. If you can check it out, that'd be great. I've had a few questions already after announcing it on X earlier today from various people around the world about where they're able to pre-order it from. I believe that if you're in Europe, so I've had a bit of interest from Scandinavia side of things. I believe you should be able to get it. I believe in Australia you should be able to get it. I believe in time you'll be able to get it in America as well, which is exciting. I think there will be an ebook as well for those who've asked about Kindles. And regarding those who've asked about an audiobook, as much as I would love to do an audiobook and read out my book, maybe I wouldn't be given the chance, maybe it'd be somebody else who does it. I believe the chances of that happening are dependent on interest and the success of it. So if it sells well and does well and there's deemed to be a market for it, then I guess we will do one. If not, then we won't. So I guess if you're interested in that happening, ideally you will buy it as well, or at least get a friend to buy it and boost the chances of that happening. But as I say, any obviously anyone who orders it, I'd be massively appreciate, or at least if you could flag it up to your Spurs supporting friends, I'd massively appreciate that as well. And hopefully there'll be enough orders that it can lead to an audiobook. But it's something that I really wanted to do. I've always wanted to write a book. I probably wouldn't recommend writing a book in the space of about 6 weeks, which I did over the summer. Admittedly, a lot of it was going back through all the stuff I've written all season, so it's not like starting from scratch. There's a lot of material to work with, but it was pretty relentless, particularly around a job and a family. But it's something I'm very proud of. Hopefully does it justice and for the season, and will be something that whatever happens for Spurs, whether they have silverware this season or if it's another long gap between another one, this will be hopefully the chronicle of when they did win something in the recent past, which many fans, if you're of a certain age, you won't remember ever, really. I mean, say you're you're 20 years old, you probably wouldn't remember the winning in 2008. So it's quite a moment that I wanted to mark. And like I say, I think sometimes I overlook how privileged I am, or not so much privileged. I'm aware of how lucky I am to do this job, but also the rare position of being at all these events all the time and getting to speak to the likes of Ange last season and now Thomas Frank and question them on a weekly basis. There aren't actually that many of us who do this, week in, week out. There are quite a few that sort of dot in and out, but to be there throughout most of the journey and pretty much all the trips abroad was fantastic, and felt like it demanded really a book being written on it, and I have done that. Moving on, just to a few topics since I've been away. Obviously the transfer window closed. Djed Spence is in the England squad and been talking about it. Mathys is not in the Champions League squad for Tottenham, so let's just talk a bit about those topics. Let's start with Djed, because he was speaking on Wednesday at St George's Park. I wasn't there because I was on holiday. I do cover England. I'm actually going to St George's Park on Friday, tomorrow, for the press conference ahead of the Andorra game, which I'll be at at Villa Park on Saturday. But yeah, I wasn't actually at the Djed Spence interview, but my colleagues were, and I've obviously read all about it. And it's, first of all, I didn't realise personally, I wonder if it's the same for you guys out there, that he would actually be the first Muslim player to play for England, apparently, if he plays, which is interesting. I know I've tweeted that earlier, and quite a few replies are saying, what's religion got to do with it? I see your point. I'm not saying it's just still quite interesting. I mean, obviously England for a long time, has there's many Muslim people living in this country. I think it's 3.9 million people now. So I was surprised, to be honest, that he would be the first one. But he is something that he'd be very proud of. He himself was surprised about that stat. And obviously, if he gets a chance to play against Andorra or Serbia away, on Tuesday, then he will hold that record, which should be a very proud one. But all round, to be honest, what a turnaround for Djed Spence over the last year. He, this time last year, or probably sort of 13 months ago, I think a lot of us thought his time at Spurs was over. He'd had 3 relatively underwhelming loans away from the club. Obviously, this is a player that was signed in the summer of 2022 after a sort of protracted transfer from Middlesbrough, not Nottingham Forest. Forest had been where he'd been on loan and won promotion to the Championship, but his parent club was Middlesbrough. Spurs eventually signed him for about 12.5 million, but I think there's a lot of add-ons, of which actually that's something to look into. I wonder if he plays for England, whether Middlesbrough will be owed any money as part of the deal. But anyway, they finally signed him. Obviously, Antonio Conte, I remember it well because I was there in that little huddle in Korea when we were asking about various things, not Djed Spence, and Conte out of nowhere brought up that he was a club signing and basically already made his point clear that Djed wasn't his player, and he barely played him. He then went on loan to Rennes, where he played with Jeremy Doku, I think, and came through with Desiree Doué, some great players at Rennes. Didn't work out there to sign permanently, then went to Leeds, had that loan deal cut halfway through with questions from Daniel Farke or hints about his attitude. Then he went on loan to Genoa in Italy. It feels like that loan actually didn't go too badly, but I believe because of Genoa's financial issues, they didn't take the option to sign him permanently, which would have cost probably about 8.5 million, might even been euros, not pounds. I mean, think how much he's worth now. That was a proper sliding doors moment where he could have left the club. Anyway, he stayed that summer, came back with all accounts with a sort of renewed work rate ethic, attitude, everything like that, all completely spot on. Matt Wells, who's obviously still at the club now under Frank's staff, but he was the senior assistant to Ange, was believed him to be a big driver behind the sort of redemption and getting him back into the fray for Spurs. Ange kept him around, didn't decide not to sell him, or the club decided not to sell him. He didn't play him much though at the beginning. He just kept him involved, and later said it was a bit of a test towards Spence to ensure that this turnaround was here to last rather than just over a course of a few months. And he obviously wasn't, you might remember, not in the Europa League squad, but he knuckled down. And when the injuries started to really kick in at Spurs, he got his opportunity. And he was, as I've said many times, one of the rare sort of rays of light during a very gloomy winter for Spurs, where he played brilliantly, particularly against Thomas Frank's Brentford back in February. And really, the talk about England has been on the radar for a while. I personally was quite surprised that he was in the squad, not because of form, because he started the season well, but just when Tuchel first took over as England manager, he reached out to about 50 different players who were eligible for England, including James Maddison, who told us in the Ipswich mix zone when they won 4-1 there last season, where Spence scored his first and I think only Premier League goal, that Tuchel had been in touch. Spence told us later he was not one of those players. So despite playing really well, he kind of thought maybe he just doesn't fancy him. But no, he's in the squad. Tuchel seems to be impressed with the way he sort of carried on over to this season. Been helped a little bit by Destiny Udogi's injury. Udogi being one of his best mates in the squad, obviously has meant Spence has had the left fullback position sewn up at the start of the season, but actually has been really good. And it was quite interesting against Bournemouth, as poor as that performance was all round, that Porro was the one to come off and Spence shifted to the right when Udogi came on later on in that game. He is very much deserving of it. If he is to make his first England appearance in these next couple of games, it's just a remarkable turnaround. And he's been speaking, he spoke yesterday, so not only about being potentially the first Muslim player to play for England, but also on a range of other subjects. He was asked about the doubters he's had in the past. I mean, Neil Warnock famously said he would either play go all the way to the Premier League or play in non-league based on his whole attitude and approach. Daniel Farke I've already referenced, Conte obviously, who, if you remember the interview that Djed gave with Rio Ferdinand in the March international break, he said there was nothing he could do to impress that man, I think was the quote, and felt like he was always running into a brick wall with him. He said he's made a mental note of all the doubters. He doesn't have a list, but he's made a mental note of all the doubters he's faced across his time in football. But look, he seems to be making them eat their words all the way he's playing at the moment. He also talked about Ange. He said he made him a champion and he's a great guy and has full of admiration for him. But he also said that Thomas Frank thinks he's amazing and is really excited about the future. Obviously, a player is always going to talk up his manager, the guy who picks him, the guy who's sort of, their playing career is in their hands. And so you may be sceptical about any player quotes when it comes to their current manager, but at any club. But it does generally seem like there's a lot of affection from the squad already to Thomas Frank, which I think is a real feather in the cap of Frank, because he's followed someone who, by all accounts, or by most accounts anyway, most of the players liked Ange a lot. And it was a difficult situation for Frank to come into to follow on from that. But he seems to have won them all over, specifically Christian Romero, but a lot of the players over, and Spence's comments only add to that. So what else have we missed out? So I might as well jump to Tell now, because I think there's a relevance to Spence, because Tell is obviously out of the Champions League squad and Spence was out of the Europa League squad, initially at least, sort of this time last year. So Tell has to sort of take a leaf out of Spence's book, really, on how he approached that situation and build from there. I mean, I think Tell is unlucky, but I look at the squad and I'm not really sure who the obvious other player to come out of the squad would be. Some might point to Ben Davies, but Ben Davies is the way he's regarded by Thomas Frank in amongst the squad. He is really revered. He sees his experience and his influence as being absolutely massive. I don't think there's ever a chance of that happening, really, because of the way he views Ben Davies. And also at fullback, given the injuries that Spurs have had, Doggy being injured recently, I know he's back now. They obviously didn't sign that extra centre-back that they were hoping to, or at least Thomas Frank was hoping to. I just think it would be surprising to leave Ben Davies out. So unfortunately, Tell's the odd man out. I suppose some will look at it as like another sort of strange moment, not strange moment, but another moment to sort of question the logic behind signing him permanently in the first place. But this guy's still only 20. And if you want to take a reference on him, just go to Harry Kane, who sort of talked up his talent and his work rate when he was still at Bayern. And to be fair, the one sort of decent moment from that Bournemouth game was that brilliant shot from Tell right towards the end, which flashed past the post. But it's definitely fair to say he hasn't quite found his feet yet at Spurs, not quite sure where he fits in. Frank seems to think of him as more of a left winger, but now he's got a number of options, including Xavi Simons, who can play out there. Obviously, Muani's come in as well, I'll come on to in a minute. And you are looking at it thinking, I'm not quite sure where he'll get his minutes. A bit like Wilson Odegaard, but I don't know, it's gone from being, sitting on the bench at Bayern to it's hard to see how he doesn't do that at Tottenham at the moment, and now he's not even in the squad altogether. So a lot for him to do to sort of prove his worth at the Spurs. But again, he's so young that hopefully he responds to this in the right way, like Spence did, and really knuckles down and hopefully, at such a young age, people are so quick to write players off, aren't they? At such a young age, he's still adapting to the Premier League, he's still adapting as a player and progressing. Then he can use this hopefully in a positive way. But no doubt a bit of a blow from him personally to miss out. Of course, Muani coming in no doubt would have affected Tell's chances of being in that squad. I think Muani's a good signing. It's another one where it's one that was, I don't know if it's opportunistic from Spurs' perspective, but they obviously did a lot of the legwork in January, where Ange very much wanted him, was hopeful for him. It didn't happen. He chose Juventus instead. Felt like the deal was on the table for Juventus all summer. It just never happened, and it's the last minute Spurs have sort of put the green light on Muani. I do wonder about Solanke. There's obviously talk about his ankle injury and how serious it is. We'll wait to see. I think Spurs are still hopeful that he comes back after the international break. I don't have an update on that. I haven't actually checked on that since I've been off, but that seems to be the word at the moment. But then you've got to wonder, why did they move from Muani, if he is to be a centre forward, because if they've got Richarlison and Solanke, I don't know. we'll wait to see on that one. But overall, he's got the profile that should suit the Premier League quite well. He's obviously physically robust and quick, and all the kind of physical attributes you want from a Premier League player. But one that's vastly experienced, one who started really well at the start at Juventus, kind of faded later on, which we often see with loan players. But he's someone who has the capacity and potential. Seems hard, strange to use the word potential. A player who's he's not old, but he's not young anymore either. But if he can adapt, he could make that centre forward position his own in a way. Particularly if Solanke's struggling with injuries. Charleston, I think it's unrealistic to hang a hat on him being fit, all season as well as he started in the league, just because of how it's gone so far. But yeah, overall a decent signing. I'd say overall a good window for Spurs, not a stellar one. I know I tweeted that the other day, and someone came straight back to me saying, "What do you expect?" But I think I compare it to all the other clubs now that are Spurs' rivals, particularly the English ones in the Champions League. And I know maybe the amount of business they've done, Tottenham, might seem quite a lot by their standards, but I think the game seems to have changed all around. I mean, obviously there's Liverpool. Where do you even start? I mean, no one could compete with that. It's an unbelievable window they've had. But then think of Newcastle. Obviously lost Isak to Liverpool and missed out on a number of targets, but they still brought in a lot of exciting players. Obviously Chelsea have done loads of business. They always do. Arsenal have brought loads of players. Obviously Eze in particular. Man United, look at the players they brought in at the top, whether it will work or not. So I think comparing to them, it's not like they've done worse, but it's not like a Liverpool window, or it's not an Arsenal window in my mind. But for signings that make a lot of sense, I feel like they've learned a lot from last year. I think they were too over-reliant on young players, bringing only Solanke and Werner on loan, who I don't think everyone was really up to it. They shouldn't have brought him back. And then obviously a lot of young players who they've progressed in the main throughout the season, but largely because they had to. I mean, it's great that Bergvall's kicked on as a result, but I think part of their problems last year was not having enough experience. So to bring in someone like Paulinho, who's all right, didn't have a great game against Bournemouth, but overall so far has really shown what he can add to the team, give them a lot more grit and fight and sort of bite in that midfield. Makes a lot of sense, even though he's 30. I think on loan it's a clever signing. Kudus is technically a really good player, very much what they need. Xavi Simons, the playmaker they were after. I guess sort of we'll have to wait to see how much he adapts to the Premier League. It's early days, but watching him live for the Netherlands against England back in that semi-final, he was fantastic. So from a sort of talent perspective, from what he's shown in other divisions, he looks on paper a really good signing. And then now Muani, who also has played in a World Cup final. I think didn't he miss that chance against Martinez to score for France? I think it was him anyway. So yeah, overall a good window, full of really promising business. I think Thomas Frank overall would be happy. I believe he wanted a centre back as well, and maybe a left winger too. Obviously, I think Savinho, if they'd signed him somehow, that would have taken it into like a sort of stellar category. And if they'd signed someone like Emmanuel Kanji or someone like that to boost at the back, that would have been really good. But re-signing Romero was huge, arguably the biggest signing of the lot. And yeah, all round, I think most Spurs fans will be pretty happy. And that's why, yeah, I'll probably give it like a 7 out of 10. That'll probably be my ranking. Anyway, rambled on long enough. I'm going to leave it at that, but would love to hear your thoughts generally on the window, but particularly any thoughts about the book. Like I say, I'll put the link in the bio. Any pre-orders I'd really, really appreciate. And I hope you enjoy it, to be honest. I enjoyed writing it, reliving it, and hopefully it'll be something I hope for Spurs fans to sort of treasure for a long time, really, remembering that amazing win in Bilbao. Let me know your thoughts. Cheers, guys.